Hey everyone, welcome back. My name's Jeff. Today we're going to go through a simple retirement plan for Linda Harris. Linda is 60 years old. She's got about $500,000 in investable assets, and she wants to retire at age 65 in just 5 short years. So we're going to look at a few things she can improve and just see where we can make some adjustments. So we're just going to jump straight into the cash flow overview. I love this chart. It's super easy to understand, kind of see where money is going. Cash flow is just money going in, money going out. She wants to retire in 5 years, so you can see those blue lines. Those represent her salary for the next 5 years. She makes about $200K a year, and she gets a small inflation bump every single year. That red line that you see that goes through the entire simulation there, that's how much money she needs in expenses, her living expenses, whether it be her mortgage or her just living expenses to buy food, clothing, and whatnot. And you could tell for the first 5 years, any excess she has above her expenses, that's just all going to get saved. She's putting money into her 401k, and she's also putting money into taxable brokerage accounts, and she's maxing out her 401k. So she does that for 5 years, and then in 2030, she retires. So you could see the expenses go way down. Well, why do they go way down? Pretty simple, pretty obvious. Well, maybe not. Number one, she doesn't have to save any more money because she's in retirement. Now she's having to live off her withdrawals. So she can cut out all the savings. Also taxes. She no longer has to pay FICA taxes at all, so she doesn't pay that on her income. Also, the income that she's actually realizing for the next 5 years, from 2030 through 2034, is actually going to be a mixture of pre-tax IRA money and taxable money, which we'll look at here in a minute. And the taxable money she only has to pay capital gains on, which is a much lower tax rate as compared to ordinary income. So that's going to make her expenses go way down as well, because this expense number right here includes tax payments. So if she has to pay a bunch in taxes, her expenses are going to go up from year to year. And then in 2035, she's going to take Social Security. But she has a decision to make. So in our assumptions here, we just assume she's going to take Social Security at age 70. But Linda, what she could do is she could take Social Security at age 65, right when she retires. Now, the thinking here is if she takes Social Security at age 70, is that she lives off her investments for 5 years. That way, she gets a bigger Social Security benefit on the back end. If you're curious what her benefit would be potentially if she were to take it at age 65, I could click that on, and you could see on the back end, she loses money. But on the front end, she gains a little bit. So those blue bars that you see, those dark blue bars, that's the amount of her, essentially her expenses that are covered by Social Security. So you could see on the back end, if I turn this off and she takes it at age 70, it goes up. But if she takes it at age 65, she gets a little bit more on the front end. Which one is right? Well, there's necessarily a right or wrong answer here. I think what's important is to understand that in the simulation that we have here, it likes that we take it at age 70 because the simulation assumes that we're going to live until age 90 for Linda here. And if she does live all the way until age 90, and assuming nothing happens with Social Security between now and then, yes, it makes sense to take it at age 70 and to just live off her investments for the next 5 years. So we'll just leave that in and assume that. And you can see the probability of success down here change from 78% going all the way to 71% by taking it at age 65, because she's getting less money in aggregate from Social Security. She's actually having to live off her investments longer if she takes Social Security at age 65. So we'll just assume she's going to take it at age 70. In 2040, she'll have to start taking her RMDs, which is basically just a withdrawal from your investments, but it's the required amount that you have to take out legally every single year. It starts at age 75 for Linda, and you can see it here. Social Security, $84,000, her RMD, $27,000. Then she's got to take out another $19,000, just once again to cover all of her expenses. Once her mortgage is paid off, she took it out in 2016. It's a 30-year mortgage, so in 2046 it will be paid off. Now, She has Social Security, which is almost $100,000 a year, and then she has an R&B, which is $40,000 a year. Those two amounts, which are almost like amounts that she, quote unquote, has to take, those are more than her expenses. So we're gonna assume, because of her budget, that she's actually gonna take that $10,000. She's gonna save that. She's gonna put that back, in her bank, have that saved and growing. And she does that every year for the rest of retirement. So let's scroll down here and just check out the details of the cash flow. So like I said before, she's going to work here for the next 5 years. She's saving a bunch of money. And then in 2030, she's going to retire in 5 years. So on the right-hand side, you can kind of see her portfolio assets. $1 million, and she's starting with about $500,000, like I said at the beginning here. So between her savings and then just an average, I guess you could say, linear market growth, she should get to about $1 million. So is that enough? Well, based on our probability of success, like it says here, 78%, that's not bad. One thing that is pretty worrisome about this this projection here is that when she retires at the beginning of 2030 and she stops working kind of towards the end of 2029, she's got about $1 million. Well, right off the bat, the very next year, she needs $100,000, which is roughly 10% of her portfolio. That's kind of a lot in the very first year. The year after that, she needs $115,000. I mean, this is like 11% of her portfolio. The next year, she needs $128,000 based on last year's ending value of 964. I mean, that's close to 13-14%. These are pretty big values of money that she needs based on her portfolio. Now, remember, the whole point of doing this is that by the time she gets to 2070, of all of her expenses on the right-hand side that you see here, in 2035, when she's 70, she needs $118,000. Well, of that, $75,000 or about $74,000 is covered through Social Security. She would get a smaller benefit if she had taken it at age 65. So the whole point is that you're trying to fill this gap up with all of your investments. So by the time you get to age 70, you can rely on your Social Security, and then she'll have less money to take out from withdrawals. So she'll be less dependent on her investments. So by the end of 2034, her age 69, when she has $784,000 here, she only has to take out $43,000, like it says here, which is roughly, I can't even do that math in my head right now, 5% of her portfolio. So that's a lot less than 10%. So moving forward, she'd have to rely a lot less, and 5% is a little more feasible. Based on her being age 70, she'd probably only have to live another 10 to 20 years. So with that said, though, if Linda is okay with implementing this plan, if she's basically like, all right, let's do it. I want to take Social Security benefits at age 70. I'm going to retire at 65. I'm going to fill in these gap years or the donut hole years, basically with withdrawals. Well, she needs to make sure her investments are allocated accordingly, because she has basically really short-term liabilities, I guess you could say, being that the withdrawals that she needs out of her accounts are basically like liabilities. That's money that she needs in the future. So if she needs money from a short-term standpoint, 5 years and less, as every year goes by, she's 60 now, she's getting to 65 in 5 years. That's not a horribly long time frame. She needs to make sure her investments are allocated correctly. Now, looking at Linda's investments, we could tell that she's 100% in the stock market, which, based on her cash flow needs, she needs money here in the next 5 years. That's pretty aggressive. Linda here, if we go back to her cash flow here, she's kind of stuck in a tough position, because you could just tell based on her cash flow. If we go back down to that here, I mean, she's got $500,000 in assets right here. $500,000 is barely enough to cover her retirement age all the way through to age 70. And then she still needs investments on top of that if she wants to stick to this budget that she's kind of striving for. So she, at the same time, she needs that portfolio growth, but at the same time, she can't afford to have her assets take a big hit. So she's kind of left between a kind of a rock and a hard place here. So how do you kind of like essentially play both sides? Well, I think you kind of have to be a little dynamic with your investments and not static, meaning that what she could do is she could try to thread the needle a little bit here. And in 2030, or excuse me, in today, she could take a portion of her money and say to herself, I want to have at least 1 year of cash flow, that first year, and put that in bonds. That's $100,000. That means she'd basically be, if she has about $500,000 and she wants to put $100,000 in bonds, she'd be in a portfolio that has $400,000 in the stock market and $100,000 in the bond market. She would be in like an 80-20 portfolio, 80% in stocks and 20% in bonds. And then what she could do is the very next year, when she gets to 2026, she could take another year. In 2031, she could move another 100,000, 115,000, move that to bonds and have that ready to go. So she's now going to have 100,000 from her original investment here, and then another 115,000 of her portfolio. And now she's got 2 years ready to go, and she's 4 years from retirement. And she could do that for every single year. You know, when she gets to the end of 2025, she saved a little bit more money. She could put some of her investments, 115,000, take the present value of that, discount that 5 years. Maybe it's like 100,000. She puts that into a bond portfolio, and hopefully that duration of the bond portfolio kind of lines up with 2031, and she has that money ready to go. It's not exposed to the stock market. You could do a bond ladder. You could do I-bonds like through BlackRock. There are a lot of different things you could do to kind of set up that portfolio so it's ready to go in 5 years. You could just do a simple short-term bond fund. I think that gets the job done too. A lot of different ways you can kind of solve that problem right there. All right, so if we go in and we look at her balance sheet, getting back to how she should kind of allocate her investments, so you can kind of see how much she has in assets and liabilities. I mean, the only liability she has is her home here, and the rest is between her 401k, her IRA, and her Roth IRA. Roth IRA, she probably doesn't want to touch that until a long time. She doesn't need that money. She wants to take advantage, especially in her gap years. And essentially let me show you here, the gap years like I talked about from 2030 to 2034, where she doesn't have any guaranteed income, she's not working, and she's not taking Social Security, and she doesn't have a pension. She should be taking advantage of those tax brackets. So there's no guaranteed income that she has at all. So she should be kind of accelerating income through those years. Getting back to her balance sheet though, looking at her investments, when you talk about investments in her situation, between stocks and bonds. So she's got a 401k, an IRA, and a Roth IRA. Doesn't need the Roth IRA for a long time, but looking at the 401k and the IRA, I talked about just a moment ago, using a portion of this money and putting a portion of it in bonds, since right now it's 100% in the stock market. She could take a portion of this money and move that to bonds, and then the next year she could take another portion, move that to bonds, so on and so forth. So she's still trying to, have the upside of leaving part of that money in the stock market, but at the same time, kind of protecting her downside and giving herself some room to kind of breathe when it comes to planning for her expenses between retiring at 65 and taking Social Security at 70. And if she still wants to be, aiming for that upside, the new money that she has going into her 401k, that could be more aggressive, because even if there is a downturn between now and her retirement at age 70, that new money that she's putting into her 401k, that should all be capturing any downside that happens in the market, since that's fresh money going into her 401k, and she could be buying in at those low prices, since that's just fresh cash flow going straight into her investments in her 401k. So back to her cash flow here, we kind of talked about, she's working for another 5 years. We talked about how to potentially allocate her investments. I guess the next question would be, okay, her investments are allocated between stocks and bonds. We got a plan for that. How should she pull money out of her accounts as it relates to taxes? Basically, she has her IRA, she has a Roth IRA, and she has her taxable account. Well, we already talked about the Roth IRA. She's not going to touch that for a while. So she basically has two options. She has this pre-tax account and she has her taxable account. Well, where should she pull money out that makes the most sense? Well, I'm a pretty big believer that it makes sense to, at the very least, fill up the bottom two federal income tax brackets, the 10% and the 12% income tax bracket. That just makes the most sense. I think the taxes at those levels, 10 and 12%, are super low. And instead of being, knocked with these RMDs that Linda has kind of here on the back end here, it would make sense for her to, take advantage of those low tax brackets and kind of accelerate income potentially if we can here. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at her taxes, and we can look at how much in total taxes she's paying. So you could see the first 5 years is the total taxes she's paying on a year-to-year basis. Nothing we could really do about that the first 5 years here. But she has a lot of control in her retirement year all the way until 2034, those donut hole years between when she retires and when she collects Social Security in 2035. So from 2030 to 2034, what she can do is she can accelerate income potentially. So the system, the simulation that I'm using here, just tries to basically defer taxes for as long as possible. So instead, what we can do, probably not going to make a huge difference in her case, but we could take a peek. What we could do is we could say like, hey, we want to try and fill up those lower tax brackets just to see, if we can potentially save a little bit of money on taxes here. So I'm just going to run my little tool here off to the side, and you could see it helped us out a little bit. It improved our probability of success from 78 to 79%. And saved us $2,000 in taxes and made our ending portfolio value $63,000 more. So, but you can kind of see the effect here. I mean, she's trying to increase taxes in these other years to potentially lower it in these 3 other years. She has to pay a little bit more on the back end, but overall she saved on taxes. So that could be something that she thinks about as well. So one question to address is whether or not being in an all-stock portfolio is feasible in a retirement plan. It's a question I get all the time. Hey, if I'm going to get 8, 9, 10% in the stock market, but I'm only going to get, 3, 4, maybe 5% in the bond market, well, why wouldn't I just be in the stock market the whole time? And the reason is really volatility. Now, what you're looking at here is Linda's portfolio, her lifetime portfolio value year by year, if we stay 100% in the stock market. And it's using, as you can see up here, called a linear projection. So it's basically showing you if we just get that, 8.5% rate of return in the stock market every single year, yeah, we should be all right, because you're taking out from a withdrawal standpoint, at least until those gap years are over, starting at age 70, you're taking out way less than our rate of return. So you should be all right. So obviously her portfolio is going to grow more every single year, because her portfolio growth is more than what she's actually taking out. This is a linear projection though. So this doesn't happen in real life. If we run what's called a Monte Carlo projection, you can actually see that there's a huge variance in outcomes that could potentially happen. So if I actually show you what a Monte Carlo looks like, you can kind of see the asset spread. So this is basically showing you the different outcomes. If we run this through like a simulation of what potentially could happen, all the different ending outcomes. And you could see these range of outcomes. On the upside, on an above average market, she's left with 6.2 million. In an average market, 1.9 million. And then if we get a below average market, under 20% of the time, $0. So what this really is showing you is that the Monte Carlo actually did 1,000 different projections. And of those 1,000, 780 projections, or 78% of the time, the simulation was successful. What that means is we successfully fulfilled all of the cash flow needs that Linda needs. That's all Monte Carlo is basically trying to do. You have all these goals, basically all these future cash flow needs, and your investments based on the inputs here were able to successfully fill all those future cash flow needs. So you see something like this and you say to yourself, yeah, okay, I'm still okay with that. 78% of the time I could finish with as much as 6.2 million, even if I get an average market, 1.9 million. Looking at from end to end, from 2025 to 2055, over 30 years, Yeah, I mean, if you just look at it zooming way out, it doesn't look that bad. But if you zoom in, this is what it looks like. Let's go back to the lifetime portfolio value. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you one of those Monte Carlo projections. I could show you just the median. So what I'm going to do is click here. I'm going to go to an average market, a 50% trial, and you can see what that looks like. So this is basically, you're looking at how the market really performs here. It's kind of all over the place, right? Because in the short term, yeah, she started with 552,000. She fulfilled all of her cash flow needs, and she ended up with $1.9 million at age 90. Fantastic. The thing is, though, you have to kind of weather the storm through these down markets. Is Linda going to be okay with, for example, in 2032, at the end of the year, she's got 1.1 million. And then the 2 years following that, 2033, 2034, these are the years where she's relying on her portfolio solely to fund all of her needs. There was a market downturn, and it went from 1.1 million between the market downturn and she needs money out of her portfolio down to 600,000. So she's down 500K. And what happens in 2069 is, so let's go through, look at the cash flow here. What I wanted to focus on was right here. So in 2033, at 68 years old, she got $881,000. The market is still in free fall because it went from 881 to 597,000, and she's taking out 130,000. Is she legitimately going, if she's in an all stock portfolio, like we're trying to kind of simulate here, is it realistic for Linda to assume, when the market is already, the 12 months prior to that didn't have a good year, looks like the next year obviously isn't good either, is she legitimately going to take out $130,000 to cover all of her expense needs? I just don't think, in my opinion, it's realistic that someone would stick to this plan if something like this happened. And that's what happens when you're in an all-stock portfolio. The ups and the downs and the volatility is killer, because you can see the sequence of return risk right here. It's going from 881 down to 600,000. Her portfolio had a bad time, plus she took money out. So her portfolio, didn't have a great time here. And I just don't know if it's realistic to assume that she's going to stick with this plan long term. And this is just one scenario. So I can go up here and I can let's go back to the lifetime portfolio value, and let's just look at a custom 49%. What does that look like? It's going to look dramatically different. Yeah, 1.5 million. Wow. All the way down to 900,000, which she could be okay with. She might not be okay with. And then, hey, what's 48% look like? Yeah, should be okay in this one, maybe. I mean, it goes all the way down to $482,000. So how can we essentially, prevent this from happening? What we could do is rebalance the portfolio. So right now we could kind of stress test this. We could put this in a more conservative portfolio. If we click this here, we could rebalance it, her retirement assets. Now you could see she lost a lot of money in doing that. Of course, she lost the upside, but the whole point of doing something like this is changing this. Go to the average market here. So she's got 1.3 million. So we capped her upside before, looking at the average market, the 50% trial here. Now at 64, she got 1.3 million. Now her portfolio only taxed down to about 900,000. Of course, this is in tomorrow's dollars, but the whole point is that we're trying to eliminate volatility. And in this plan, it's 68% versus before I think she was at 78%. Let me double check that. 78%. It's not that much of a difference. I know you might think that it's like a D plus versus a C plus. But in terms of the Monte Carlo, that's still a pretty successful plan. And she's more likely to stick with this plan because of the fact that there's less volatility. If her portfolio goes from 1.3 million down to just $1 million, she's more likely to continue to, delay Social Security until age 70 and essentially stick with her plan. And that's all you want out of retirement planning. You want something that you can actually stick with. And that's the issue with having an all stock portfolio, is that you might not stick with it. You're probably going to ditch it when the market's down. If we had like a .com bust, or if we had a 2008 or anything, what happened in 2022 when the market was way down, you're just less likely to actually stick with the plan. And that's what we're trying to eliminate. We don't want you to ditch a plan simply because your portfolio isn't doing well. You want to try to implement something that makes sense for your circumstances. So something else that Linda could kind of look at here has to do with her expenses. So we're just assuming Linda needs the same amount of money every single year for her retirement expenses. Well, realistically, Linda's probably not going to be living the same lifestyle when she's in her later years. When she's in her 75 to 80 years, she's probably not going to need the same inflation-adjusted budget. So what she could do is she could say to herself, okay, I need $60,000 in today's dollars for the first, 15 years, 20 years of retirement. Then in my, quote unquote advanced age, I'm probably only going to need $50,000 in today's dollars for my retirement. And you can see just by doing something small like that, which honestly is probably pretty realistic, since she's not going to be traveling as much, maybe not even eating out as much. She's going to be a little bit more sedentary. She could say to herself, hey, I'm gonna reduce my budget in my advanced age to $50,000. And that could certainly help her out in terms of funding her retirement. I mean, it went all the way to 87%. That's a huge increase, and gave us $2.4 million in terms of portfolio assets. And her assets, of course, live still to age 90. So a few other things that Linda could think about. Number one is an estate plan. We didn't even go through an estate plan with her, but she could maybe potentially at least have a will, potentially a trust, because she has property. She wants to make sure her beneficiaries are kind of set up correctly and make sure assets pass on to the next generation efficiently. Also, her home. I mean, Linda could potentially sell her home. She could downsize. That's another asset that she has kind of in her arsenal there. She has the mortgage on the home as well that we went over. It was a really low interest rate. She got it in 2016 when the rates are super low. But selling her home, she could potentially do in the future as well. She could sell that home and realize the proceeds and downsize potentially and not have a mortgage. And that would help her cash flow. She could save more, and that would put less stress on her investments. And she could also think about long-term care. Didn't really talk about that too much, but that could be if Linda is single, she's living alone, and she has a long-term care issue, she could need a private nurse, maybe potentially full-time. In California, that could be over $100,000 a year. Long-term care events last anywhere from like 2 to 5 years. How is she going to fund that? That could be something she needs to think about. Does she need to invest into, or at least look into, some kind of long-term care policy as well? That's all I got. Thanks for watching. If you want to schedule in some time to chat with me about retirement, want to learn more about what I do as a wealth advisor, feel free to click the link in the show notes for a complimentary consultation. Thanks. I'll see you there.